Cynthia Buchanan is a talented artist. She is also a caregiver by nature and an occupational therapist by profession. Throughout her adult life, Cynthia has taken care of her husband, her mother, her father-in-law, and her sister-in-law in times of medical and personal need. She has also taken care of a long list of patients, aided by her education and by her natural instinct to search outside the norm for problem-solving solutions to life's challenges. It was through her role as a therapist that Cynthia met and cared for Dr. Dale Probson, helping him to overcome the results of a tragic accident in which he'd been involved. Little did she know the ways in which their lives would continue to intersect, at a time when Cynthia became the one in need of some life-challenging problem-solving.
He was a pediatric dentist who was hit by a drunk driver on his way home from the grocery store with his son in the back seat. Son was okay, but he was seriously, seriously hurt. He was in a coma, I think, for 3 months. And when he came out, he lost 75% of his eyesight. So he could no longer be a dentist, and his brain damage really affected his memory. He went through lots of different therapies, but then ended up at this place that I was working at, Total Therapy Management, part-time as an occupational therapist. And he was actually my patient.
The job that you were doing in that role as an occupational therapist is more than just working with people. You are trying to help them reestablish their lives in some way.
Exactly.
What is it about that appeals to you?
Just problem solving. How to help a person get on with their daily life.
Did it ever get to a point where it overwhelmed you, though? Because it's, in some cases, it can be discouraging or sad.
It is. There can be when somebody gives up or loses hope. Yeah, it can.
But it didn't discourage you?
Well, no, because it was my mindset to try to problem solve and just keep going. Well, you can't do it that way, but maybe you could do it this way. Maybe that's not a conventional way to do it, but let's problem solve and figure out how you can do it.
Who taught you that kind of a life skill?
Well, some of it was education from the college and life experiences, I think, just working with people and know what works and what doesn't work, what's easier, what's harder.
But there was no mentor or family member who helped you see that wisdom? No.
My father introduced me to occupational therapy. I hadn't heard of it, but when I was a junior in high school, he worked for the Easter Seals Society in Michigan, and he took me to work one day to introduce me to an occupational therapist. I said, that's kind of interesting. And some of the work that occupational therapists do, it was working with art, weaving or working with clay. That was part of the studies, actually.
So occupational therapy is a scientific medical profession.
Absolutely.
Did you ever feel like you were going against your natural grain working there?
At the time, it felt right. It felt like a job that I could do and would want to do, helping somebody get independent. Yeah, I felt like it was something that I could do. I wanted to do. I was working at the hospital, St. Joe's Mercy Hospital in Pontiac, which is a suburb of Detroit. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis.
How old are you at the time?
I was 45, I believe.
And how old were your children at this point?
Emily is the oldest, and she was 17, and my son was 15.
So functional, able to care for themselves.
But teenagers at tender age, and to have something like that was the hardest part about it, I think, was having to tell them.
What was their reaction?
Frightened.
How did you tell them?
My husband and I did it together. He all along kind of was with me, and he knew what was happening all along. I didn't keep anything from him.
What were the symptoms that made you realize there was a problem?
It started out with numbness of one leg, and I went to the doctor, and this happens quite a bit with multiple sclerosis. They don't diagnose it right away. They try other things, and he thought it was maybe nerve damage or maybe a spinal problem. So he sent me to physical therapy, and I went that route for a little while, and there was no improvement, no change. And then I had an episode where I couldn't walk. My doctor ordered an MRI, and that clearly showed that I had multiple sclerosis.
How long was your episode when you couldn't walk? How long did that last?
About 2 weeks. It would get a little better, so I could at least go to the bathroom and figure that out. But in the meantime, I was seeing this doctor. We took the MRI, and then they were able to say, you should take this certain medication. And the medication that I started with was Avonex, and it's an injection. It's intermuscular, which means the needle's like the size of Rhode Island. No, it's long. It's long. So, but I finally mastered it, and eventually my husband, I asked him, could you please do it? So he was glad to help me do that.
What did you know about MS before you were diagnosed?
I knew because I had patients that had multiple sclerosis. And the ones that I saw were kind of towards the last of their illness and were not in good shape. I knew it was progressive. I knew that I could end up in a wheelchair. That was my biggest fear, I think, not being able to walk. That kind of scared me. I needed to tell my mother. My father had passed away, but I knew I needed to tell her. That was hard too. I went to my church and talked to my pastor and said, how do I tell them? And he said, you just say the words. You want to be honest with them and say the words. She broke down, and my next step was to sit down with the children and tell them. And they knew it was serious when my husband and I called them into the room and we said, got something to tell you. You think we can work it out? Right now, it's not the end of the world. I'm not dying. And we'll just have to step by step figure it out.
Did you believe what you were telling them?
I really did. I've had it for 20 years.
That's pretty remarkable because you're active.
Yes.
I mean, I've seen you
Yes.
several times since I've come to Michigan, and you're up and out and about. And
Yes. I continued working after my diagnosis for about 3 years. And then I realized part of my duties in the hospital was to help the patient take a shower. So I would physically need to, not carry them, but make sure they were safe in transferring. And I just couldn't do it any longer. It was wearing me out. So I did have to stop working, and that was hard. That was tough because I loved working with people, and I liked my coworkers, and so I missed that. And that is when I learned about Dr. Dale, and he had an art studio.